Yeah. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session. Excited to have three speakers with me today. So, it's going to be an interesting discussion, and it's really going to be fast five. I have five great questions that I want to ask our speakers. It's going to be about their first jobs, their career epiphanies, and AI's workplace revolution. So, the speakers I have with me today are going to be all part of the Change Leadership Conference, which is coming up on May 31st. And today we want to go a little bit behind the curtains with them to find out a little bit about them. Most times, when we meet with speakers or they've really climbed the ladder in their careers, it's sometimes easy to look as if success happened overnight, but they started somewhere. So we are going to find out all about where they started, and we're going to find out their thoughts on the AI in the workplace and how that's changing things. And we're going to talk about ChatGPT, which is one of my new favorite toys at the moment. So there's no way we're not going to talk about that. We might not get a chance to dig in with everybody at the conference, but at least we're going to get a chance to get your perspective on this. So thank you so much for joining me. Welcome, Sylvia. Welcome, David. Welcome, Greg. Great to have you joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
Before I get into the Fast Five, and in the spirit of testing out what Fast Five is going to look like, let's start off with some introduction. So, Sylvia, tell us in 15 seconds, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can do it in 15 seconds,
Okay,
but
30 seconds, 30 seconds.
thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. Pleasure to be here. David, Greg, very nice to meet you, and looking forward to the conference. So, a little bit about myself. I am the Director of Workplace Strategies, Modern TO for the City of Toronto. I look over a program that is developing the future of work for the City of Toronto. We are consolidating 15,000 staff across the city into major civic centers. So consolidating 55 buildings into 15. Talk about change.
Yes.
Talk about change. Can wait. Can wait. Happy to
That
be
is
here.
that's exciting. That is really a lot of change, to do. And David, tell us about you.
So I'm VP of Learning or Leadership Pipeline Institute, and I stumble over that because this is literally my second week on the job. I started last Monday, so some huge change within my world. I think for me, best described as a lifelong learner. I've been in the learning and development space for over 35 years, focusing in on leadership development, change, resilience, all of those types of things. So if you want to dig into that a little bit further, I do have a TED on resilience. Just search my last name in TED and you'll find it.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to have you on board. David has been part of our community for ages, so always great to engage with you in a discussion. Hi, Greg. Tell us about you.
Hello, well, good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you're joining us from. I'm Greg Roth. I'm one of the founding partners of Harbinger, and we're a consulting firm that specializes in change enablement, learning, and communications. A lifelong learner myself. I did cut my teeth back in '98 when I joined PwC and then transitioned to IBM. And I called Big Blue home for almost 15 years. And I will be celebrating this year my quarter century as a consultant. I've worked with companies like Tetra Pak, Air Canada, Bell, Direct Energy. But I will say the most fulfilling work I've done has been in the public sector. And I know I'm not supposed to admit that I have a favorite child, but having worked with organizations like the Ontario Ministry of Children and Youth Services and Shared Health Manitoba, I've had the incredible pleasure to support those organizations as they've really driven transformations for people in communities that are in risk. So thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you, Greg. Yes, you're not supposed to say you have a favorite child, but it all happens, and and the kids always know.
It's true. They do, don't they?
They always know. They always know. So my name is Yvonne Rukia-Pavetta. I'm a change management strategist and the founder of the Change Leadership organization and conference. So always excited to host another Change Leadership conference, and we're going into our seventh year this year. So really excited about that and to have all the speakers join us before the event. If you have any questions for the speakers or our guests today, please put them in the comments. We'll be looking out of the comments. If you have anything you want to share, just drop it in the comment. We want to hear from you. And as you join us, whether you're watching the replay or you're joining us live right now, tell us where you're joining us from. Drop an emoji. Let's know you're with us. Let's know you're listening and you're part of the conversation. So I'm going to get right into it. And I'll start with you, Sylvia. Tell us about your first job. What was your first ever job before now leading a 15,000 people integration and change?
Well, thank you for it. It took me back, Yvonne. It really took me back. I'm like, oh my goodness, one of my first jobs. Yes. So my first job was working in a bakery, actually. I was a helper in a bakery. This was back home in Romania and was right after I finished high school. It was before I went to university, and I loved it. I learned a lot there, and I still bake. It just it's always stayed with me. But what I really wanted to share actually was my first job here in Canada. I came to Canada when I was 21 years of age, and I didn't speak the language. My first job was as a cleaner, and I worked in Jane and Finch. It was something to start with, and it took me from there into a career in law enforcement and security for a very long time, and I ended up in public sector. So Greg, you said it was your child is public sector. I would say public sector is my parent. So I have been in the public sector in public service for a good part of 22 years, and have changed roles quite a bit. So I started as a cleaner, went into security, and from there, I lead one of the major priorities for the city right now, which is the workplace strategies.
Wow.
A couple of things though about you really brought me back. You said
Wow.
how much time do we have? I mean, I can a long time to tell you stories, but it did charted my career. Actually, what really got my interest into security was actually when I worked as a cleaner. I saw this police car pull up, and there were two female officers that came out of the car, and I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I want to do. And it really charted my career into community safety, into learning more, into risk management, and so forth. And then from there, it's history. Although it takes a couple of books to write before I get there. But that's my first job. Two main jobs that stayed with me forever.
And that is pretty interesting. And Greg, what about you?
Oh, so Sylvia, like you, I could probably go on about this. In fact, I feel like I need to write a blog on the topic. But back in the day, for me, there were really only two industries to dig into when I first began working. It was retail or hospitality, and I dodged the hospitality bullet, but retail caught me. And for those of you who are old enough to remember or recognize the name Timothy Eaton, those were my humble beginnings. And I was stationed in the camera department, which was an eclectic mix of cameras, but also fine pens, computers and calculators too. Now, it really was an incredible proving ground for me to understand human behavior. And honestly, it helped me develop the skills I use every day. I had a front row seat to really understand first of which customer relationships, and started to kind of unpack how humans rationalize needs and wants, and kind of what motivations drive our behavior. But it's also where I first discovered that the art of the sale was as much about education as anything. And really every customer engagement, I had the opportunity to share my knowledge and my passion for this little piece of equipment that would help kind of chronicle people's lives, the camera. It's also where I really started to understand that as human beings, we crave the easy button. And that's where we want our technology to do all kinds of complex things, but at the end of the day, we just want to point and shoot. So kind of keeping that in mind certainly has been a theme. I have touched on it many points in supporting organizations going through substantial transformation.
And that's a great analogy. Sometimes you just want to point and shoot and just get into it. And I like also the one about the easy button. Thank you.
Mm.
And David, what's your career trajectory been like?
Much like my two esteemed colleagues, Sylvia and Greg, and thank you for sharing your experiences. We could write a book. It's been extremely varied. And Yvonne, thank you for asking this question because it's really got me thinking. And I'm like, first job, and the phrasing was it actually ever. So this is
Mm,
like the very first. So I thought back, what was it? Paper route. And I thought, well, that's boring. That's not going to really be any big life lessons. And then I started really thinking about it. And I realized there's two things I drew out of that. First one is systems thinking. This was the origin of me going down the systems thinking road. And it got me thinking about how can I tweak this process? How can I make this better? How can I improve it? How can I hack the system that I was in terms of the paper that I was actually employed by, which was the Mississauga News at the time. And the way they did it was different than the other papers, but I kind of modified and riffed it a little bit and made it work even better, in my opinion. And then the second element was the customer service piece and how important your customers are, because without them, you've got nothing.
mm,
Part of that job was it was kind of entrepreneurial based, where you were in charge of an area and it was up to you to go out and sell the subscriptions and collect the money and deliver the product. And it was kind of really a full holistic element, and it really got me started down that entrepreneurial path because my next job was really my own company. But it got me really reminiscing and thinking. But I do have to ask my colleague Greg one quick question. Were those film cameras back then?
They were, yes, they
Nice.
were. It's true.
I
Yes.
know. I think I was thinking the other day about the negatives that you'd have in those cameras, and you'd have to take out the negatives, send it to the shop, and have it developed. And you only had maybe 32 or 28 or 24. Now you just use your phone and you keep on just clicking and clicking and clicking. And taking all you want. But thank you so much for sharing that. And the reason, we want to know about your first jobs is that often at times where we are now, might not be a reflection of where we were in the past, but it's significant in shaping where we get to in the future. And even in your stories, you shared how that was significant in shaping your ideas, your experiencing, like David, you shared your systems thinking, or how you connect with your stakeholders. So all of that is key. And thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm going to jump into our next, 4 questions. And this is fast five, so we're going to whiz through them very quickly. Um, Leaning back into your first job ever, what would you say was your single most profound turning point in your career trajectory when it comes to even leading change? I will start with Greg.
So it was 100% serendipity. And in fact, it was a pretty mundane moment. I was the general manager at the Vancouver Aquarium at the time. And I was also in my mid-20s. I was the youngest GM the aquarium had had. And I know I'm dating myself, but I grew up watching Danger Bay and I was living the dream. But after 7 years there, I was having coffee with a friend of a friend. And they had just been hired by PwC as a consultant to help support organizations that were kind of dealing with the great Y2K situation. And
Y2K.
I know. And kind of as you do when you're meeting in person, we compared careers. We both agreed that we had the coolest jobs ever. But oddly, the next day I got a call from a recruiter at PwC. And whether they had mastered the art of recognizing talent in the rough, or if they just maybe had hundreds of seats they had to fill, I'll never know. But what I can say is that cup of coffee changed my life, and kind of the rest is history. But the serendipity of that moment, taking advantage of the yes, really seeing the opportunity in something as casual as a conversation with a friend was really important.
I like that. It's exploring opportunities, being open minded, and you never know where that will take you. And Sylvia, what was that most profound single one thing you'd say?
There was it made me, I have to really reflect on this, the questions, it really brought me back. But there was one moment where there was a true fork in the road for me. As I was going the path of becoming a police officer, which was the dream. Like, yes, you don't, I was in security, but really, I'm going to become a cop. That is the path that I'm going on. And I was in university also at the time. I was working full time, but I was in Ryerson in psychology, and I was doing this research as to why do women want to become law enforcement officers. And I had done this, my thesis was in this subject, which was, the question that I was wondering of myself. And in the same time, I was going to take the test for Toronto Police. And I had been training and everything else. And I had, a written down application as you did back then, and, write it all down and, put it in an envelope. And I literally stared at the envelope, and believe it or not, I still have it. I'm not a hoarder, but I still have it because it was that profound for me, to where I stared at this envelope with the application in, and I said, I don't actually want to become a cop. I don't. What it had done, all of this learning and research, it really opened my eyes to be on the other side. I wanted to be the one that decided where somehow provided a safe environment to where there was no shooting, and so it really broadened my universe to the whole broader public service, and it clearly charted the career that I am right now, which obviously is not in security anymore, but it really broadened the trajectory of me really building a city that is safe, building a city that is one city, and the rest was history. Every decision that I made ever since goes back to that change in direction, to say, no, I actually was very clear, and I knew it. I knew when it happened. It was like, yep, that's where I'm going, and there was no turning back. And I often talk about that moment, and I was talking to one of my kids yesterday actually about that moment, about that, to say, what, yeah, we're going to make changes in that. You might be on a path, and it's okay to jump on another one, as long as you're anchored, and exactly that you're mindful of that change, and that you're going to fulfill your own your own purpose, really, because it all comes down to purpose.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And, a great reminder that we may be on one path going in one direction, and we have the options, we have the choice to change the direction, especially as we see the way technology is shaping things, or the disruption around us, or even the pandemic, or the socioeconomic factors, or layoffs that are ongoing. And people may sometimes feel stuck in one career because of the investment that they've made in that career and being on that path. But that's a clear demonstration. We can always change. You may have changed earlier, but there are people who are changing in later years, and we have the opportunity to do that, as long as, like you said, you have the anchor. And that's what makes the whole difference. So thank you for sharing, Sylvia. David, what about you? What was that single?
Wow, talk about a hard act to follow there, Sylvia. That's inspiring as crap. I want to join you now. I'm also rethinking my answer because of Greg's comments around that opportunistic piece. So I'm gonna build on this a little bit. When I was asked this question, my first thought was Air Cadets. So I joined cadets. I was airplane crazy, wanted to be a pilot, and I heard you could get your pilot's license, so I joined. Serendipity kicks in, and one of the officers of my squadron was working on his PhD in leadership, and he was so inspiring, Teddy Vokes, and he got me started in that path of loving learning, and especially loving helping others develop in that whole realm of leadership. Just setting me down that path. But what I find fascinating is how that manifested in my life, because at that point in my life, I was 100% going to be an RCAF officer. I was going to fly helicopters and pluck people out of the North Atlantic. That was it. That was the only option that was for me. But my eyes weren't good enough for the military. I couldn't go down that path. And I've now ended up in a completely different path when you look on the surface, but the underlying core value is the same. I'm helping people develop and lead, and just, you can find so many different ways to get that itch scratched, if you will, in terms of, how you manifest that. So, find that vision, find what drives you, and then be open to ways to fulfill that vision.
Thank you. And one of the things you all have in common is that, and a great trait of being a change leader is just being open minded. You've opened yourself up to what opportunities were in front of you and explored it. And in exploring it, it's led you to where you are now. And I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, do you love where you are now? I'm just going I'm just going to make that assumption. And if you could very quickly, our next question would be 2025. What do you think is going to be the single most biggest disruption in the workplace? I say 2025 because everything is moving so quickly. I'm not even going to ask you 20, in 10 years time or 5 years, just 2 years time. What do you envision to be the biggest disruption in the workplace very quickly? I will start with David.
It's not that far off, but you're right. Things are changing so quickly. My thinking is the definition of what a company is. We're seeing, the gig economy came, and in some people's opinion, the gig economy kind of came and went, but I disagree. I think it's still coming. It hasn't quite found itself yet. And when we couple that with the whole remote work hybrid revolution that was imposed upon us through the pandemic, we're seeing more and more people are working out of city, out of province, out of country even, where, this idea of a company as a group of people that come together into a physical space to work together, I think is gone. And we're going to see more and more of smaller companies that are global, because it used to be that you had to be some large, huge, IBM type company to go global, and you don't. You can have a half a dozen people and still be global. And I think just that whole, shrinking of the earth. The other day I was doing a Zoom call consultation with two colleagues. One was in Malta and one was in Australia. And I did the map between those 3 points, and it was something like 32,000 kilometers. And, we had a half-hour conversation, clicked on. So, what is a company and how they're formed and function, I think is going to be the biggest changes that we're going to be seeing in the near future.
It's going to be a smaller, kind of like a smaller, more integrated type of space between us. Okay. Greg, quickly, what would be your single,
I'll maybe answer it a little differently to say the change I most hope will be realized by 2025. And that's really enabling a corporate environment of family builders. Now, it's interesting because I don't have kids myself, but I have seen it up close and personal as kind of the great women and their partners kind of face the daily struggles of meeting the demands of the workplace, but also home life. And we might have been able to close our eyes to it in the past, but now we broadcast from our homes and we see the personal lives of the people that make our organizations great. And we can't put that genie back in the bottle. Now, if you haven't had a chance to follow Indra Nooyi, do so. She's a former CEO and chairperson of PepsiCo, and she's a great advocate for the concept of family building. And she comments in her biography, she shares a note from her daughter, actually, that says, I will love you again, Mommy, if you would please, please, please come home. And I think that note had a profound effect on her, both as a mother, but also as a leader. And I think we're at an inflection point where we can really remove barriers in the workplace, and particularly barriers that have real impacts on family builders. So I think it's worth remembering the next generation of great leaders have parents that are working in our organizations today. So it might not be a disruption that happens as quickly as 2025, but I really hope that we continue to have this new world of work that brings family builders into the conversation in a really meaningful way.
Greg, I'm going to take that into the next question that we have for all of you, but I want to hear from Sylvia quickly. Sylvia, you're doing workplace modernization for City of Toronto. So I know we could go into depth on this question, but in terms of everything that you feel and what you're seeing, tell us quickly what you think that single disruption will be by 2025.
Yeah. I think we are still defining. We're still learning. We haven't reached the maturity of what the future of workplace is, which what David says mentioned. So I think for me, there are two things that they're not necessarily disruptors, but I think we will see huge mindset shifts That is, one is leadership. I think we're going to see a redefinition of what leadership is, and how we lead. And I think it may sound cliche, but leadership is, different. I think while it's the same, I think we're one of the things that we're actually seeing in this transformation is actually a different way of leading. And I think that's going to be huge. The second one is culture, and I hear this a lot, and like, oh, and the culture has disappeared because there's culture cannot disappear. Culture exists by the nature of existence, and so yeah, so I had to get that off my chest. So I think we have to get over ourselves and really and really talk and actually anchor that culture in it. So I think those are the two things in the next few years.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sylvia. And it's one of the things that we've definitely learned from the pandemic and ChatGPT from a technology AI perspective is that we cannot predict what the future is going to look like and what changes are going to happen in the next couple of minutes. Talk less of, in the next 2 years, anything can happen. And, I was having a conversation with someone about, ChatGPT, and they said, oh, what, our kids' generation, how this is going to, all of this technology, not just ChatGPT, but how technology and robots and all of those are going to impact the future generation. I say, you're thinking too far. It's impacting now. Those changes are impacting us now, and we need to respond to it. So talking about that and even the buzz around AI, I use ChatGPT because when people think AI these days, that's the first thing that comes to bear. People think immediately ChatGPT, but AI is a conversation we've been having even with the Change Leadership Conference for the last 7 years. And that's actually how I even connected with Habinger. Even talking about AI and robots how many years ago. But now we have ChatGPT. So my very quick question to you is, are you using ChatGPT? Yes, and how? Or if no, why not? So starting with you, Greg.
Sure. So I saw a headline not too long ago that said, you won't be replaced by AI, you may be replaced by someone that knows how to make the most of it. And I really feel like those are never truer words that have been spoken. It's a lot of
Yes.
hype. There's certainly perils too, but at the heart, it's a tool, and it's a tool I use regularly. Best example I can provide is recently a colleague asked me, why isn't common sense common? It was a chat, and I know it was a rhetorical question and one that wasn't soliciting a real answer, in part because I don't think there is a good answer for that one. But hey, I thought maybe ChatGPT can help, and it did. I added a few additional details. I added that the response needed to be humorous and actually use at least one curse word. Thank you, Ryan Reynolds. And it promptly delivered 3 paragraphs of pure gold in a couple of seconds. And it cut to the heart of what the colleague needed, which was really a rant. And by the way, the curse word that it suggested was fudge nuggets, which is perfect because I'm a classic granny swearer. So it was a really good marriage of technology and humanity. And it saved me so much time. But more importantly, it was a tool that gave me what I needed to quickly support that colleague in a difficult circumstance. And I'm happy to have it in my toolkit for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Greg, just to lean into what you just said in the previous question about family building, that's what ChatGPT is going to help us with. Now you see people working 16-hour days, literally, or even more than that. And that's simply because there's so much work to do. But what if you have ChatGPT as a collaborative assistant? What you can do is even reduce that time that you have to do work and spend more time with your family. So things that would literally have taken you 5 days to research, you're researching it in 1 hour, literally, like research, pull it all together, look at different sources. It's 5 days, if no kidding, if nobody if you haven't used it, literally try it. So that's something that will help drive family building because it allows us more time to spend with family. And so that was what I wanted to build on when I told you in the next question that yes, ChatGPT might just be paving that way for us, when it comes to family building. David, What about you? Do you use ChatGPT?
I have not gotten to use ChatGPT yet. And the reason is just simply a workload thing. But as I'm listening to my esteemed colleagues answer, I'm thinking, I think I'm going about this backwards. But I do have to say I've been using AI for a bunch of years, and we all have. And this is something where ChatGPT is, it's the latest tool, it's the latest buzz, it's the latest, fad, if you will, and it will come and go. But we think back to the transition of this into, the zeitgeist in the normal society. I'm of a generation where this conversation was being had with calculators when it came to exams. So calculators were really coming into their own when I was coming through school. I know I'm dating myself here, but there was this deep-hearted discussion. There were literally protests around allowing calculators into exams or not. And nowadays it's, how could you possibly show up without one? So, will this become part of our society? Absolutely. What will it look like? That still remains to be seen. But honestly, you reference Change Leadership Conference, in its infancy, in its very initiation, AI was there along with you. And honestly, it's been around for a lot of the years before that. It's just, we haven't been seeing it. It's now just really coming to more of that sort of mainstream and more of that transparent, because there's so many technologies that we use and are comfortable with that AI is driving it at different levels. So there's still a lot to go in terms of, where it lands and where it finishes. And I don't think it'll ever finish, to be honest.
No. And isn't that just interesting? And that's something we can think about, because I know that there may be no time to answer, is when it's so like change, AI has been there. And sometimes when we're leading change, there are things that just exist already, but it takes one thing to do the shifts. It takes one thing to be that catalyst that shifts people's mind into accepting it or receiving it or understanding it, because we've been having that discussion about AI. But all of a sudden, there's that one thing that just creates a movement, and then people are starting to adopt it more and more, and there's greater awareness. So reflective of how we lead and drive change. Sylvia, what about you? Do you use ChatGPT?
Well, I have to share something. This is actually AI. All of this, all my answers have been AI generated. I'm just kidding. I got you. I got you all. They're like, oh my God, really? No, that's not true. I have not used it only because I just, like David, I just haven't gotten around to it. I hear a lot of buzz about it. It just hasn't been in my practice so far. I do want to try it though. It seems rather exciting. I hear a lot of stories. I hear the kids talk about it all the time. So I'll probably give it a try. I certainly think the use of technology, especially artificial intelligence, is going to grow. And I think it is something we should explore and try to incorporate into our work. So I certainly think it's very positive. I just myself haven't integrated it. So.
Okay, that's interesting. 50-50.
Yeah.
Greg, the way I use ChatGPT, I literally think the whole world uses it, because I'm like, the date's down. I'm like, how can I work today? Where's my assistant? Literally like my secretary assistant, somebody supporting me. So to think that, everybody's not using it, I'm living in a cocoon type of world right now. But thank you for sharing that. So I have one final question, and this time a bonus question that I want to really ask you. So now we're moving back to the conference, and you're all speakers at the conference on different topics. What are you most looking forward to sharing and discussing at the Change Leadership Conference on May 31st? Very quickly, I will start with you, Sylvia.
So, we have led the return to the office, and I think we're going to hear a lot about, the impacts from COVID. The one thing that I bring it with, and I'm going to focus on, is we have to meet people where they are, no matter how we lead what it is that we're doing. And this may seem very simplistic to say, of course, this is, change management. I'm not a change management person, but I do lead a lot of change. What I'm talking about is really the core of any transformation that we make, anything that we do, is that it has to be mindful. It has to really speak to whoever it is whatever it is that we have to do, it has to speak to the center. The people are at the center of everything that we do.
I
That's
like
really
that.
going to be my speech. I really look forward to meeting a lot of the participants in the conference as well, and they're very exciting topics.
Yeah, oh Lord. And
Yeah.
just one of the things that's always a hit at the conference is when, we can look at case studies to people to say how are they doing it in their own organization and listen to their war stories of how they've done it, because it's one thing to hear about all this theory and models on how to lead and manage change, and it's a whole different kettle of fish. Okay, kettle of fish. I shouldn't have used that, but it's a whole different scenario. When it comes to how do you do it in practice. Kettle of fish I thought was universal. I just learned it was very British.
Really?
So another conversation for another day. And David, you're going to be leading an interactive exercise and
Mhm.
engaging session, and you're going to be kicking it off and wrapping it up at the end. So tell us that one thing that you're looking forward to at the conference in
I've blo-
bringing to the folks.
I've boiled this down to a single word: optimism.
Optimism.
Optimism. There's an amazing future ahead. The technology that we have today is mind blowing, and it's only getting better. We have the ability to shape that and to be part of that future and to be part of that
Mm,
narrative. And as change leaders, there's great responsibility, comes great power, and all of that side of things. But there's also some great opportunities here. We are living in very historic times. There's things that are happening today that future generations are going to be reading about, and it feels almost like the human race is a bit of on this cusp of we're either going to implode or be amazingly awesome. And I'm looking toward the amazingly awesome end of that spectrum, and I think we can do that. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to turn that corner and to do it well. And as change leaders, we're going to be integral to that.
Oh, thank you so much for that, David. And literally a question that I asked my book club. I'm part of a book club, and 2 weeks ago the question was that there is so much changes. There's so many changes happening around us, and you can look almost as if the world is about to implode in a negative, type of
Mm.
way. And to bring optimism, to see how we can see that light at the tunnel, and how we as change leaders coming together can make a difference. I am looking forward to your session. Let's see how
Okay.
you're going to move the needle on that one.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. Greg, we're going to be on a panel together. We're going to be talking all things change management, insights, trends, and a lot of fantastic stuff. Tell us what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, so it's in our name as harbingers, and I've often been asked why that name. After all, who wants to be the harbinger of doom? But it's a good question. We realized early on that it's not enough to know change is coming, good or bad. You have to be the herald of the change. So to be able to anticipate the reactions, to the transition, to navigate the currents, react, adapt, fail, repeat. So I can't wait to hear from all of you. The real heralds out there that are finding new and exciting ways to deliver real change enablement. So it will be a fantastic event.
No, thank you so much. I totally agree with you on that one. Because change is evolving, and one of the main ethos behind the change leadership is that we're all change leaders, regardless of role, title, responsibilities. We all have that mantle to lead and drive change. So as it evolves, those are the kind of conversations we're going to be having, and how we can equip ourselves and our teams and our organizations to be that driver and leader of change with optimism, and hear case studies of how people are really doing it. Indulge me in one last question as we wrap it up. And this is literally a 5-minute question, and I'm throwing you guys in the deep waters here. If you had to have a robot at home or work, what would that be? Just what robot would that be? You don't have to tell us why. Just tell us what robot you would have at work if it had to be one. I have one already. It's the one that cleans my house. I'll call it a robot. But I would have somebody. It would be a service robot for me for sure. I actually have the vacuum or the the iRobot that goes around. So I'm ready, and I also want a dog as well. That is a robot. That's right. So I'm not going to say why. I'm just telling you what it is. So Sylvia, starting with you, if you had to have a robot at home, what would it be?
You just stole it from me. Yes, I would have the cleaning robot for sure. Every cleaning, okay, that would be my thing for sure.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
David, what about you?
Hmm. This is a tough one. I'm kind of leaning towards the cleaning robot to get the sort of mindless tasks out of the way. But I'm going to put a caveat on that. As we were chatting just ahead of opening the session, you gave me the example of a colleague of yours who was their first job was as a farmer. And I spent some time as a farmer myself. My wife and I raised and trained horses. I actually worked on a sheep farm in New Zealand for a couple months. And there's a huge amount of benefit in connecting with the world in a way that is not like, oh, let's get the boring tasks out of the way and we can focus on those higher level things. I think we are losing touch sometimes with, our humanity and the world that we live in, and we need to reconnect with that in some ways. So I love the idea of the cleaning robot that enables me to get out of the house and reconnect in ways that, I can get rid of some of those mundane jobs, but at the same time, I don't want to get rid of them all because we evolved with those mundane jobs and we find benefit from those. How many times have we, had the great epiphany while doing the dishes? So I'm really torn on this one.
Okay.
But I think whatever robot I get, it's going to have an off switch so that I can turn it off. I can go do the job myself and reconnect when I need to.
Okay. And Greg, what would it be for you?
So I seriously have given thought to stealing the two robots at my favorite hotel in Chicago, Leo and Cleo, and magically text them. They show up at my door with the missing toothbrush, the bottle of Diet Pepsi, or any number of other things that I have accidentally forgotten. So if you see a headline that says that Leo and Cleo have gone missing, you know where to find them.
We have you on record, Greg.
I like this, and I'm just going to quickly show. We actually have Miriania said I would prefer some robot that can manage my schedule and keep me reminded of the daily task and activity. Greet the postal services.
I'm liking that one.
Yeah, that is interesting. Actually, there's an AI tool which is called I think it's called Productive GPT. All you do is put in all your tasks for the day. Just list your 5 tasks for the day. Tell it how many hours you want to work for that day, and it will break down all the tasks. Break it down into subtasks for that item that you want to do, and tell you how much time you have to do those tasks. So that's another way you can use AI. So productive AI, put in your task, and it will break it down onto all the steps to take and how much time it's going to take to execute on those steps. So I use that one, as well. But yes, I wish I could get a robot that would now execute on those tasks. So I do have to do it. And I do have to do those tasks myself. So that would be interesting. David, you want to say something before?
Yeah, I do, because as you were describing that AI, it reminded me of a program that I used about close to 30 years ago. Like this was the DOS days. This was pre-Windows days. It was called Lotus Agenda, and you would literally type in. Greg, did you use it? Do you remember it? Yeah, you would. And I wish they brought it back because it was brilliant. You would literally just type in sentences, like you would take notes, and it would read your sentences. It would book appointments for you. It would organize your data. So like if I say to a note like, oh, I need to book a lunch with Yvonne, if I looked at the Yvonne, what's going on with Yvonne, it would be there. If I looked at my calendar, it would be there. And like it read the stuff and it actually did some of that. And that's like close to 30 years ago.
So, and that's the thing, we've had some of these things before, and it's just now making it more accessible for everybody. And I think that was what ChatGPT did. It just made, AI more accessible to a whole broad variety of people. And but we've been using it. Anybody who's gone on AI, you've gone on Amazon.com. AI was working behind the scenes. Oh, yeah. So even Google, all of those things were working behind the scenes. But now we are in the driving seat somewhat. No, we're not in the driving seats. Actually, I take that back. But we are now. able to use it. We're not in the driving seat. No
Yeah.
way. Somebody else is driving that thing behind the scenes. That's a whole different conversation. But thank you so much. I invite all our listeners to connect with our guests, Sylvia, Greg, and David, on LinkedIn. Please connect with them. Questions following this session, they will come back and comment on it. And, join us at the conference on May 31st, whether virtually or in person. It's going to be interactive and we will get to connect some more. I will drop the link in the comments in terms of how you can get your tickets for the event. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for joining us, and great to have you, and looking forward to May 31st.
Thank you. And thank you, Yvonne, for creating
Thank
this
you.
community and really connecting all of these folks together.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Bye for now, everybody. Connected to you
Take
soon.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.